feel me? Yeah. New part-time that I kept a rule, Sanetertv7, my try never cock him. Hotel. Never high vibe, put a new session. Mommy rock, say my heart is happy. Damn, they rude. Never high vibe, put a new session. Mommy rock, that I write for God. Never high vibe, put a new session. Mommy rock, say my heart is happy. And I praise God every day. A new Tefek, to honor the kept a room I try. I'm in the Tef, never cock him. Rena, M. Shinu, pass I ride the suit biddy. He too witty, never mental. Kept a rule, suitin' at the rule, to a ride side. Jedi, Madu, Natir, the fair. Yeah, Jedi, Ray and Kim, the fair.
Come today. What's your name, my brother, for the viewers that's out there?
I am Commanding General Yahanna of the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge.
Okay, I heard a lot about you. I've seen a few of your videos as well.
The world heard about the truth.
That's right. That's right. And I noticed how you talk real greasy about the ancient Kemetic people, dealing with the homosexuality, dealing with so much stuff. Well, we not African.
You know what? I speak real greasy about anybody that murders my family, just like you would. Okay. Somebody come and harm your family member, you gonna speak grievous about them too. And Africans murdered us, man. They were a major part of the slave trade. The white man couldn't have gone into the jungles of Africa and brought us out.
There's a kind of notion that you'll hear a lot of people say that, you know, Africans enslaved their own people. And in fact, they didn't. In our imagination today, this is one place inhabited by one race of people. But that wouldn't have made much sense to people at the time. You know, that Africa was and is a dizzyingly diverse continent with literally thousands of distinct ethnic and linguistic groups. And so there's conflict and, you know, and contestation between those groups. And that grows dramatically, that conflict grows dramatically in the course of the centuries of the slave trade.
So yeah, I'm gonna talk real greasy about it. You understand? The problem with us is we think we're them, and we're not. We think we find the greatest African culture, like Egypt, one of their great cultures, and then we jump up and down and act like that's us, when we got nothing to do with it. There's not a single so-called African-American scholar or teacher of Egyptology that can say that his descendants come from Egypt.
So General Yahanna don't seem to think that no African-American student in Egyptology can trace his descendants back to Egypt. Hey, yo, you don't trace your descendants, man. Your descendants come from you. You must be talking about your predecessors or your progenitors. That's what you trace. And when it come down to this Egyptology, let's just try that for a moment. Let's take a look at this Egyptian gene. The Egyptian gene. Although not detected in the royal mummies whose DNA had been examined so far, this autosomal ancestry marker is also clearly African in origin. Today it enjoys the greatest spread in Egyptians. About 1 in 10 Africans or African Americans have it, but a sharp spike occurs in Copts, today's successive population in the land of the Nile, where up to 27% possess it. About 7% of European Americans have it. Tellingly, perhaps, East Coast Indians and Melanesians have it in elevated levels. It is hardly noticeable in Asia, suggesting that it did not form a significant part of the great migration of humanity out of Africa about 100,000 years ago, but spread to Eurasian populations primarily from Egypt to the Middle East in historical times. Now see, that was cool. They came up with cool results that 1 in 10 Africans or African Americans had this gene. But they did another search, another study on Ramses III DNA, and come to find out he was E1B1A. And what's that? Let me show you. DNA analysis shows Egyptian pharaoh Ramses III had sub-Saharan African haplogroup E1B1A. Genetic kinship analysis reveals identical haplogroups in both mummies. Using the Wilt-Athe haplogroup predictor, we've determined the Y chromosome haplogroup E1B1A. The testing of the polymorphic autosomal microsatellite Loki provided similar results in at least one allele of each marker, Zahi Hawass. And now if you want to take a look at the genetic atlas, what you're going to find out is that E1B1A originates right about in the Horn of Africa. All right now. And if you want to see the percentage of people who got it, it says 80% of Angolans is E1B1A. All right, you want to go down the list, you can see right here. What? African Americans, 55% E1B1A? Oh, nah. What that mean? That means 55% of your DNA is the DNA that was running through Pharaoh Ramses III. So if any Egyptian scholar wanted to trace, any African American Egyptian scholar wanted to trace his progenitors or his predecessors back to Egypt, I just did it for him.
There is no doubt in my mind at all that the original ethnic appearance of the Egyptians, or what we call the Egyptians, the original Egyptians, were black Africans.
Scholar or teacher of Egyptology that can say that his descendants come from Egypt. Not one. They will all admit that their history don't come from Egypt, but they'll just say, well, it's black culture, so we should follow it, and we can gain from it, and we can this and we can that. But you know what? Black people always kept it real. Why should we start plagiarizing somebody else's culture? If you don't know who you are, how you gonna take another man's culture and then try to make that culture yours? We're not Africans, we'll never be Africans. Africans are our enemies because they sold us into slavery.
The question of African participation in the slave trade is one of the issues that's sort of most delicate at the time, and today it's apt to be misunderstood. There were people in Africa who participated in the trade and profited handsomely from it. But it's a fairly small number. It would have been very difficult not to participate in the trade. Not only were European traders carrying goods that were very valuable, iron pots, for example, but also things like guns, which could greatly enhance the authority and power of one group of people vis-a-vis its neighbors. And European traders become very adept at trying to foment conflict because they realize that in regions in which there's conflict, the flow of slaves down to coastal ports will increase. So one of the primary trade goods that's being carried on ships is guns. The British in particular export over the course of the transatlantic slave trade, over the course of about a couple centuries, at least 20 million small arms, pistols, guns, into West Africa. There's a decade at the peak of the trade in the late 18th century where 1.5 million guns are sent from Britain alone to West Africa. And again, if you didn't participate and your neighbor was acquiring guns, well, then you could find yourself on the next slave ship out.
But isn't it true, Brother General, when the pyramids was being built, there was no such thing as Hebrew Israelites on the planet?
That is a 110% lie.
Show and prove that the Hebrew Israelites existed at that time of Imhotep.
Let me tell you something. Imhotep, all of them were during the time of our people's slavery in Egypt. They turn around and try to say, well, there was no Israelites in Egypt. I've been to Egypt several times. I looked at the archaeology. I looked at the records. Now, I pull out books all day. We'll sit down and take the time and bring out all the records. We was enslaved in Egypt. You're not going to tell me that in the Egyptian records it doesn't say the Hyksos were there. And you're not going to tell me that it doesn't say that the capital of the Hyksos was in what you call Cairo today, which was Goshen in the past. They're not going to say that. But of course, like in America, they don't call you by your identity. What do they call us? African Americans or Negroes. They called us shepherd kings back then too. And let me say this.
No, Mr. General Yahanna, I don't want to let you say anything else. It is because you do not know what you're talking about. You're going to sit here and say that during the time of Imhotep, Jews were slaves in Egypt, he asked you to show and prove that. You didn't show and prove that. What you did was mention the Hyksos. So you equated the Hebrews to the Hyksos. You just took a stance or a position. Now you can't get out of that stance or that positions. That's you the Hyksos. Now, you trying to make examples of how Hyksos were slaves in Egypt, but that's completely untrue. How could you make example of Hyksos being slaves in Egypt by quoting Cairo as the capital? Slaves don't have a capital. Secondly, you just got through admitting yourself that they called you shepherd kings. Why? This is because the Hyksos had a dynasty in Egypt. The 15th dynasty of Egypt was the Hyksos dynasty. Slaves don't have dynasty. Dynasty means a family of rule. This means the Hyksos were a ruling family in Egypt. So where all the slavery go?
They called us shepherd kings back then too. And let me say this, for all the Egyptian scholars, every Egyptian scholar that pulls out archaeological books on Egypt, when you go to the back of the book and you look at the credits on who the original archaeologists are, they always go back to Manetho. Manetho was the archaeologist that was first commissioned by Ptolemy to bring the records of Egypt out. Those are the foundations of all Egyptian archaeology records. And we found out Manetho was a damn liar. Manetho was a liar. Manetho plagiarized the Egyptian history. Why? Because Ptolemy was building a huge library in Alexandria on all the religions and cultures of the world. So Manetho wanted to get rich off of Ptolemy's money and plagiarized a bunch of lies about our history.
Wow, you must really don't know what you're talking about. Let me show you something, bro. You said Manetho was a liar and that he plagiarized the history of Kemet. Let me ask you a question. How do you plagiarize a history of pharaohs and pyramids and tombs in Egypt? Who else got that? Where you gonna steal that from? What are you talking about? He plagiarized the history of Kemet. Second of all, let me show you why you were a fool for calling him a liar. Because Manetho's works only survive in the works of three people. That's Flavius Josephus, Sextus Julius Africanus, and Eusebius of Caesarea. And of the three, none of them were contemporary with Manetho, yet Flavius Josephus, his book, Against Apam, is the book that he wrote that contains works of Manetho that he discredits in his defense of Judaism. But that ain't your era. Here go your era. The story of the Hyksos, who you equated yourself to already, only survives through us from Manetho through Josephus. Okay? So if Manetho is a liar, then the story about the Hyksos is a lie. And you calling yourself a Hyksos or a shepherd king.
Why does it have Hebrew writings, you understand, all in the Egyptian culture? Why is that? Because they stole it from us while we were in slavery.
Why is there Hebrew writings in Egyptian culture? Well, first of all, Egyptian culture lasts for at least 3,000 years. Okay? And if you really want to think about it, Hebrew writings really didn't enter Egyptian culture. If you want to revert to Jews in Elephantine and write 500 BC, you're going to find out they didn't write in Hebrew. Okay? If you're trying to go back further, you're going to find out that Hebrew wasn't present in Egyptian culture. As a matter of fact, what you will find out is the grandparent language, great-grandparent language to Hebrew, which would be Proto-Sinaitic, with the traces, the inklings of that script, okay, can be found in the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now, what this would mean is that the beginning, your ABCs, as soon as you began to learn how to write that down, it was based on Egyptian hieroglyphs, okay? We also know that there was a lot of communication between Canaanites and Egyptians.